The following documentary contains topics including mental health disorders and suicide, which some viewers may find distressing. If you or someone you know is currently suffering with mental health difficulties or considering suicide, please find relevant UK helplines and websites in the description where you can discover all the help and information you need in a time of crisis. Ways of getting support will also be displayed at the end of this episode. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'd say the struggles I've had the most is not being able to physically go out and see my family and friends, especially for the likes of my grandparents who don't know how to work social media, don't know how to work Zoom, Skype or something, so having to see them through the window is really difficult and really hard not to be able to physically go and give them a hug or spend time with them.
The thing I've struggled with mentally the most is anxiety, just from not knowing what's going to happen and how I will react if I get COVID. It's been really stressful.
I have one friend in particular that has really struggled because of lockdown. She's not been able to find work, she's struggling with money, and she's living away from her parents, and because of that she's in a very bad place, really struggling, needs support, friends around her, and yeah, she's struggling because of lockdown.
The coronavirus pandemic in the United Kingdom has been the single biggest national disaster in over 75 years since World War II. Tens of thousands of lives have been lost, businesses have collapsed, people's livelihoods have been destroyed, and we now face an unprecedented period of economic downturn for many years to come. However, one other costly byproduct of this pandemic has come to the fore: worsening mental health. High-profile figures who are more sceptical about the effectiveness and merits of lockdown, including Nigel Farage and Alison, have cited the decline of people's mental well-being and suicide as to why they feel, in Farage's words, the cure is worse than the disease. Now, those who take the opposite view and believe harsh restrictions are indeed necessary whilst the transmission of the virus is high, have also highlighted mental health as a major issue, however, one matter both sides can agree on, if nothing else. But despite this, there is the sense young people have been left behind amid the chaos. What about their mental well-being? Well, this issue was not in the national media spotlight until last November. On Thursday the 5th of November, the University of Manchester decided to install fencing around their Fallowfield halls of residence, coinciding with the first day of a 4-week lockdown in England. This fencing was met by an angry response by those living in the accommodation, and decided to take matters into their own hands by staging a protest and ripping down some of the barriers erected just hours earlier for the sake of protecting their own mental well-being. The incident captured the attention of multiple national outlets, including ITV breakfast show Good Morning Britain, who interviewed 3 students involved in the demonstration, although this story received a very mixed reaction to say the least. While some were horrified at the prospect of students being caged in, others were less sympathetic. Critics of these students portioned blame on them for allegedly meeting up with each other and increasing transmission of the virus, compared their situation to the elderly who are more likely to live alone during lockdowns, and even suggested that those who participated in the protest should pay for the damage to the fencing. Durham University PhD researcher Michael Priestley, former editor of the Student Minds blog who studies young people's mental health, has a message for those making comparisons between generations.
I'd say that I understand that different people in society are obviously facing different challenges, and different demographics have different challenges. But I would just reiterate that it doesn't need to be kind of one group against another, and that students and young people are facing additional kind of challenges and stresses of being at university too. Lots of students are very isolated whilst being at university. Perhaps living on their own for the first time in an unfamiliar city where they can't go anywhere, surrounded by people that they don't know, perhaps on a course that they're paying lots of money for, with people that they're never going to meet, and with lecturers and tutors and things that they can't get in touch with. So there are challenges that students are facing, and it's understandable if students are experiencing challenges with their mental well-being too as a result of COVID-19, and I just say that's not to kind of underplay the challenges that kind of older people or middle-aged people have. It's just in a pandemic we can all experience kind of challenges and difficult situations that impact on our mental well-being.
In a study by UK mental health charity Mind conducted last June, 73% of 18 to 24-year-olds said their mental well-being had got worse during the pandemic, the seemingly most affected age group in the survey compared to others. And in the same investigation, 83% of respondents cited feeling bored and restless as a major reason why their mental health had declined, coinciding with a steep rise in youth unemployment. The number of young people not in work rose by over 275,000 in the quarter of August to October 2020 compared to the pre-pandemic period of January to March earlier on last year, with the youth unemployment rate increasing from 12.1% to 14.5%. Perhaps concerningly, freedom of information requests made to 3 ambulance trusts across South England shows mental health related calls between March and May 2020 at the start of the pandemic actually decreased on average from the pre-pandemic period. Are people not opening up at a time when they may need to do it the most? Well, to make things worse, less than a third of children and young people with a mental health issue currently gain access to NHS treatment according to Young Minds, a statistic the government will want to improve on. Someone who is all too familiar with young people and their mental health problems is University for the Creative Arts student Taylor Caddick, who has run the Talking Head podcast series throughout the Covid-19 period on the Farnham campus, speaking to fellow students about their experiences and giving a platform to those who have little voice in the mainstream. So what have you seen personally with students and mental health problems during this pandemic? And has this been any different really from normal times in terms of well-being improving or worsening? And if so, how?
So speaking personally, I've been at 2 education institutions whilst the pandemic's been going on. I've been at a college and a university, and at both I've seen the mental health problems within students got a lot worse. I think that's probably because they've been working so hard for the grades, and the hard work hasn't really been produced by the grades that have sort of been estimated for them, and it's a very frustrating experience for them to have. So I can I've seen firsthand how difficult it's got.
Just moving on from that, how do you think the government are dealing with university students and young people in general during the pandemic from a student's point of view?
So quite consistently the government have reduced the amount of funding that they're doing into mental health support for people, which is sort of really paid out really terribly during the pandemic. And you know, we're now at a point where 1 in 6 young people now have a mental health problem. That's an NHS statistic that came out last year. I actually think it's higher than that, but 3 years prior to that it was only 1 in 9. So there's a massive issue going on, and the government are putting money into it, but we're yet to see an effect.
And if you could send just one message to the government about this issue, perhaps a tip or a word of advice, and you had just 20 seconds really to make your point, what would it be?
So speaking as an art student, I've seen the industry that I want to go into thrown aside, torn apart, and that isn't fair and inclusive. And I think a lot of students have felt the same way about their own sort of roles. So I think if we're going to go forward, I think the government should make their policies way more fair and way more inclusive.
Okay, Taylor, thank you for joining me.
No worries.
Well, the Conservatives have been under intense student scrutiny during the pandemic, with topics including rent, tuition fee refunds, online learning and student stress on the agenda. In response to government criticism on this issue, Tory MP James Sunderland, who serves the Bracknell constituency, said, "Several studies have been conducted by the government on this, and is why certain measures of creating bubbles and allowing exercise has been implemented. In general, I know that ministers recognise this and have put in place unprecedented and wide-ranging packages of support. The £8 million Wellbeing for Education Return programme will support staff working in schools and colleges to respond to the additional pressures some children and young people may be feeling as a direct result of the pandemic, as well as to any emotional response their staff may still be experiencing from bereavement, stress, trauma or anxiety over the past months. This action comes on top of the existing commitment to invest at least £2.3 billion of extra funding a year into mental health services by 2023-24 through the NHS long-term plan. I am pleased that the NHS will also receive approximately an additional £500 million this year to address waiting times for mental health services, give more people the mental health support that they need, and invest in the NHS workforce." Overall, Sunderland was very complimentary about his government, who have imposed 3 national lockdowns on the country since March 2020, and went on to conclude, "For what it's worth, my humble view is that there's been a commendable, pragmatic and entirely conditions-based approach to the pandemic. The word unprecedented is often overplayed, but there is no policy precedent for Covid-19 and the government has rightly needed to feel its way. I am therefore satisfied, from my own close scrutiny, that every decision has been made in good faith under significant pressure, in accordance with the prevailing advice and against the weight of an unknown enemy." There's no doubting GCSE, A-level, college and all other university students should all receive the mental health support they need. But what about the well-being of student nurses as well, some of whom may have been on the front line during this pandemic? The British Association of Critical Care Nurses chairwoman Nikki Credland at the start of the pandemic admitted there will be a need to provide additional psychological support to nurses, especially those who have been working in intensive care units looking after some of the most poorly Covid-19 patients. And the World Health Organization has even released separate guidance on the mental well-being of healthcare workers. Johnny Hunt, a nurse in the Republic of Ireland, has worked with many young nurses during this pandemic and puts himself in their shoes as a more experienced member of the workforce.
Huge pressure, huge anxiety and huge unknown for people. You're going into something you're not sure how to deal with, and the intensity of it and the impact on your own life and your family and people close to you. It's been huge for me, and I've been in nursing 26 years. So for somebody without experience or out working frontline to be landed in that when you've not even got some of the basic nursing skills practiced yet, and you're dealing with this, it's crazy. It's a full-on situation that if you get through it, you can do anything. That's the positive.
I'm not going to lie and say there has been some times where I've considered, is it really for me? Am I emotionally, mentally strong enough? But I think it just takes that one patient on that one day where you can see the difference that you've made to them to make you want to continue. Because at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do.
Whilst everyone's focus remains on getting through this pandemic in the present day, post-pandemic we will continue to face the effects of this global disaster. A statistic from mental health charity Young Minds reveals that as many as 1/3 of adult mental health conditions are directly linked to negative events experienced in childhood. If that's anything to go by, this country faces a major mental health emergency in the future as the pandemic takes its toll not just on the elderly, not just on those who are struggling to pay the bills, but young people of varying ages at this time of uncertainty. Michael Priestley believes there could be several long-term effects on youngsters from this major event.
I do think the pandemic will have severe long-term impacts. I think in particular the financial impacts of the pandemic will have long-term impacts for young people in particular, and we know that financial factors can impact on people's mental well-being. I think the educational impacts, lots of students and young people have had disruptions to their education, which will be significant and have long-term impacts, as well as potentially the impact on forming social relationships and things like that. I just also hopefully wonder whether some of the impacts might be positive. I think that the pandemic has given universities an opportunity to reflect on some of the support they provide for student mental health and well-being, and also given young people a chance to reflect on how they look after themselves too.
Although this is a major issue for the nation to tackle, it's not all doom and gloom. Up until now, only the problems facing us have been discussed, but with most problems there come solutions, and these solutions can be implemented at both the government level and by the ordinary person on the street. Even a simple gesture from individuals could go a long way in helping those struggling not just right now in Covid times, but also in the future. Local councillor Rob Millist describes some of the steps we can all take to help others.
I think on an individual level, we can just ask twice, if someone's saying, yeah, I'm fine, well, use your senses about the situation. This could be a peer, a friend, or even a family member, and it's just check in with them, and if something seems a bit off with them, be curious, ask them open questions, what's going on for you today at the moment and that kind of stuff. And I think solution-wise, it's just having that conversation about mental health, making it more open and accessible, and maybe making it, the norm to talk about feelings. How do you feel about that kind of thing?
It just shows you there is a way out of this. Yes, there are huge divisions in our country, and yes, mental illness is a process and it's not something that you just get over. but together we can break down the stigma of talking about how we feel. This shouldn't be a left or right issue, or even a point of conflict between generations. And you hear the phrases, it's okay not to be okay, and be kind every single day. And those messages are so important. And you know what you can do to help others. But what about you? How are you feeling? If you need that extra bit of support, never ever hesitate to get it. You matter, and you always will. And here are some of the things you can do if you need that helping hand.
Let someone know you're not alone. It might feel like you are alone, but please speak to a friend, speak to a family member, speak to a teacher, speak to somebody, because you're not alone. Chances are somebody else has been through something very similar, and they might be able to just give you a new perspective, or just make sure that you feel heard. You know, quite often we deal with things that are really dark and really painful, and we think we're alone, but the truth of it is that we're not alone. So reach out to someone. There's a friendly ear out there that will lighten the load for you.
To be honest, don't struggle like I did when I was 21, when I had my first major bout of mental illness. If I could have reached out and could have asked someone for help, it would have made my life a lot easier, and I wouldn't be here 30 years later having to deal with things. So that would be the message to anyone. You're not alone, you really are not, and it's okay to say you're not okay and ask for help. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, especially when you're in a caring profession or you're young. No one has all the answers in life. You know, as we get older, we still don't, but we can help each other. And I think more so than ever now is when we need to just reach out to each other, and we can guide each other through, you know, this journey, however long it lasts. And, you know, you'll be okay.
For more information on how you can help yourself or others at a time in need, please call the Samaritans on 116 123, where you can talk to a volunteer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, or send an email via their website at www.samaritans.org. Alternatively, you can check out papyrus-uk.org, where you can find resources on how to improve your mental health as a young person during the coronavirus pandemic, and get support through email, text, or by phone from 9 AM to midnight every day. Remember, you will never be alone.